We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The Supreme Court is over for the season, but what ramifications were there and what taste has it left in America's mouth? Fortunate to be joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, constitutional scholar, lawyer, man about town, and dapper gentleman for the day, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, and host of the Excellent Uprising podcast, to discuss the term that we've just experienced of the Supreme Court. Scott, for me, it was an amazing term to watch. What do you make of it?
Yes. Well,
and that's all we have time for with that erudite answer from Mr. Cosenza.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you for having me. First of all, it certainly was an interesting term to watch. For somebody who I have spent basically my adult life kind of be interested in the work of the court and all that goes on there, and to see it come around from a time where abortion law, for instance, in this country was so open to the notion that not only were abortions legally permissible, but we actually had case law in this country from the Supreme Court whereby free speech rights were restricted outside of abortion centers, that you couldn't approach a woman who you thought was going to have an abortion and say to her, please don't do this. Don't engage in this procedure. It's wrong. It's not okay. So to see that come from there to, now that we have Dobbs and we have the situation where states can restrict abortion massively, and to see now, Mark, with affirmative action and these other cases falling and gun control and more and more and more, historic is right. But, there will be another turn at some point in the future. So it's mostly about, seeing what's happening now and just
swings and roundabouts, we call it in my home country. Swings and roundabouts, goes one way, then the other. So, yeah, it really was. I think, obviously, I haven't been watching the courts as long as yourself, Scott, but there was the bright line gun ruling with New York Rifle and Pistol versus Bruin. There was
even more than
action.
I'd say you're even soft selling it with that, because it's not just a bright line. It's actually more powerful ruling for the gun rights proponents, Mark, for the gun people and for Americans who want that treasured Second Amendment right to be guaranteed, because the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin case doesn't stand for the notion of, well, here's a line that you can't cross. The line is, it better not have been illegal, at the time of the founding, basically, to strip somebody of their gun rights. And I hope we're going to talk about a case the Supreme Court has coming up for the next term that impacts this.
Is this the qualified immunity case?
No, that's the no. It's a case about whether or not you can strip someone of their gun rights who has been adjudicated to have committed domestic abuse.
Actually, right, I know this one. Yes, so let's go straight into that. Actually,
it's called
Scott.
U.S. v. Rahimi. That's the name of the case, and it's one of the 2 or 3 big cases that have already been selected by the Supreme Court to hear in their next seating that happens after they come back from their summer breaks. Yes.
Well, let's get into that. So before you give us the outlines of the case, could you give us the ramifications of hearing this particular case?
Well, that's the only thing that matters, right? The ramifications. Yeah. Mr. Rahimi, by all accounts, is probably a very awful person who's done a bunch of bad stuff, and that's why he's in the situation he's in. I don't hear anybody saying, he was innocently walking down the street and accused of all kinds of.
He's no George Floyd, right?
Right. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that anything can be done to him, of course, without regard to his rights. And what he has asserted is that by the way, this is a person who was convicted of being for a person who was forbidden from possessing a firearm and possessing a firearm. That's the conviction we're talking about. That can come from any number of legal mechanisms. In his case, it was because he had this domestic violence issue. And so the issue in Rahimi is, can you strip a person of their Second Amendment rights absent some hearing designed to specifically do so? The facts established on this domestic violence stuff, think of other fundamental rights that are offered to Americans. Could you strip them of the right to vote? Or, again, he's not I don't think he was a convicted felon. So that's the part where, it differs from other laws. If you want to convict somebody and remove their rights, we have a mechanism to do that. criminal conviction, right? But
Yeah,
the
or
civil,
felony conviction. Yeah.
yeah, I think I probably should have front loaded that. What we're talking about is our civil determinations by judges. So
Sure.
that's why, because if you were listening to me and thought, well, gee, they take people's rights away all the time when they throw them in a prison. Yes, that's true, because they've been criminally convicted. And in this case, what states have done in order to kind of grease the skids for removing accused abusers from households is have it be done in a civil court where the burden of proof is much lower. And so basically you're getting a civil law treatment, and the consequences are much more dire than is ordinarily brought forth in civil court, which is usually about money damages, mostly, and contract disputes.
Okay, and so Mr. Rahimi,
yes,
has been stripped of his constitutional right to own bear arms.
So Mr. Rahimi was stripped of that right, and then chose to possess a firearm and was convicted of possessing it, and he's now challenging that conviction and saying that it was wrong for the courts to grant that I had been stripped of my rights, that stripping of the rights was in violation of my constitutional rights to not have my rights be stripped from me without some sort of sufficient procedural, some kind of process.
Now, I'm assuming, Scott, because this has been accepted by the Supreme Court, which I guess at least 4 justices have agreed to hear it.
Yes,
that this has potential to impact many people, not just the Mr. Rahimi, who the case is named after. It has the if a ruling is to live on this one way or the other, then if it's ruled against that it was right to have his rights stripped, it was correct to have his rights stripped, then we're likely to see civil proceeding against many more people taking away their right to bear arms. However, if they agree
once again, let me stop you right there, because I think you're soft selling the breadth and scope.
That's always me, here. Scott. I'm so understated. I'm such a subtle guy.
Which is that if legislatures can work to strip people of their rights and at the same time carve out exceptions to where those rights are taken without any kind of criminal trial, and the procedure, may not necessarily even include their participation. There's something called where the
red flag laws.
Yeah, like, right. Okay. So without going down that rabbit hole, this doesn't necessarily stop at guns. What would stop a legislature from using this in any other manner of speaking? Maybe if you haven't taken a certain antiviral shot that is prescribed by public authorities, for instance, can we strip people of their rights for that? So it goes well beyond just the firearms area, but it is quite broad in that area too. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody realizes, when we talk about these issues at the Supreme Court, and the reason why they're so fought over with such vigor is because of their impact, not just for the specific litigants or that even issue, but
they essentially trickle down to every court in the land, which I don't know. To me, that seems like quite a good way, to determine if something is constitutional or not. And then all the lower courts, the ones with the little fiefdoms with the politically appointed judges. Of course, some of them are very great and wonderful people who deserve to be there. Others are there because they went to school with somebody else. But they all have to essentially consider that at some point, this could make it to the Supreme Court, whatever I'm ruling on here. And then it's going to look bad on me when students learn about this for decades to come, that it was my bad decision that took this to the court. Well, if the next season of The Justices, available on Netflix and all good podcast providers, I guess, is anything like the last one, it's going to be quite the show. Scott, are you hopeful for more constitutionally favorable rulings in the next session?
Hope springs eternal, Mark.
Hope springs eternal. Wise words indeed from Mr. Scott DeCosenza. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Joe Schaefer, and Scott DeCosenza for taking the time to come in and join us on this show. And also to you at home for taking the time to tune in and have a listen. I'd like to leave you with the important, poignant, and ever so accurate words of Ronald Reagan, who said, "I hope we once again have reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. And it seems we've arrived at a point where the common man and woman must realize that the prime operation of the government is to say, if it isn't broken, let's try and fix it anyway. Because the basic understanding and ideas that we have for a successful society, well, let's admit it, they differ greatly from that of the federal government. And I think it's time we all realize that significant truth. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.